how a telecommunications and data center provider can improve its market presence. How can a telecommunications and data center provider improve its market presence? Whenever someone approaches me that seems to have what appears to be two distinct lines of business, my first question is, do you want to have two different lines of business, or do you want to consolidate them into one single brand and one single approach? If you're going to have two different lines of business, there's a really good chance that you need two different go-to-market strategies, that you need two different sales teams, two different marketing teams, potentially different kinds of account managers, different product managers, different channel managers. It's almost like two distinctly different companies. And when you start to think about the resources that go into the duplicative resources that go into that, you start to realize why there's just so much mergers and acquisitions that happen on an annual basis, especially among the data center operators like the co-location and wholesale kind of companies. But it happens throughout the entire ecosystem. Was interviewing a senior marketing executive for one of the major data center hyperscalers a couple of weeks ago, and I was joking about that. With all the consolidation, it's almost like banks, where if you ever know someone that's worked in retail banking, and you know how often there's rebrands and mergers and acquisition that go around. If you look at how many different business cards, how many different logos they've had on their LinkedIn or companies on their resume throughout the course of their career. And there's a similar kind of motion that happens in and around the data center industry, because especially among the big co-location providers and wholesale and hyperscalers, it's just so capital intensive, and there's so much potential as you bring things together to achieve efficiencies by consolidating. So the first question at a high level is, are you going to keep telecommunications and the data center business separate, or are you consolidating them together, where the same marketing team, the same account executives, the same sales developers, the same customer success or account managers are basically the client-facing roles, where they're just basically trying to determine, does a client just need co-location? Do they just need data center related services or data center space? Do they also need telecommunications? Or are we offering carrier neutral options, peering, interconnect, all the stuff that drives down costs, drives up the availability of choice, increases competition. So when you're looking to improve your market presence, I think there's really two different kinds of market presence at this point. A lot of times people come to me and they ask for advice on building their brand. And in the era that we live in now, building your brand is about so much more than your logos and the hexadecimal color chart and your font selections and everything. You're building your brand is now everything that people say about you when you're not in the room. What your most important buyer personas are saying about your team and your company when you're not in the room. And given that you're not in the room for very much of the buyer's journey anymore, typically 83% of the buyer's journey is over before sales contact, we need to work extra hard to make sure that we're building up our brand, not just for the final 17% of the buyer's journey at the decision stage, but we have significant market presence throughout the full buyer's journey. So we're also crushing it. So we also have a strong market presence in the awareness and the consideration stages with the most important companies and the most important stakeholders in those companies. And the way we invariably need to do that is, for starters, we need to recognize that a typical journey now, a considered journey, can have as many as 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decisions. So our goal isn't just to have one or two of those 28 touch points. Our goal is to stack the decks in our favor as much as possible by being involved in as many of those 28 touch points as possible. So often in and around the data center industry, we see it's very common for large companies and mid-sized companies to make very significant investments in field marketing and event marketing. And that can be good. It can be very effective if the events are getting you in front of the right buyer personas, if their demographics line up nearly perfectly with your ideal client profile and your buyer personas. But even when that happens, the epic pool party that you had poolside at the Cabanas in Las Vegas is still just one touch point. The amazing celebrity golf tournament that you had, raising money for one of the most respected nonprofits on the planet, that also, unfortunately, only counts for one touch point. So you have 2 out of the 28 touch points. What are we going to do to get you in on those other 25, 26 touch points so that you stack the decks in your favor, so that you're continuing to nurture and educate and build trust with the most important buyer personas in the target companies that you want to grow your presence with? So a lot of it becomes self-awareness that we're in this journey now where it's self-propelled, it's self-driven. Your sales team operating as traditional transaction-focused sales team is really not welcome in most of the early and middle conversations anymore. So the only way that we're going to get those folks in is a radical makeover so that they show up as consultants and teachers and trusted advisors that are going way beyond just answering the questions that your prospects and clients have, but are sharing unique insights and best practices about how others in similar companies have navigated these issues. So in other words, they're not just answering the question that's right in front of them. They're answering the question that's right in front of them, and they're guiding the prospect or client to the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 26, 27, 28 different steps that a person like that in a company like that is likely to be navigating through as they look to try to achieve this big goal that they're trying to achieve, or overcome this big challenge that's stressing them out, that's causing them to miss time away from their friends and loved one and family gatherings, and messing up their downtime during vacations that don't end up actually becoming vacations. So with all of that in mind, for your telecommunications data center related services, to improve your market presence, it's figuring out how you're going to show up in the right places early as possible and as often as possible when it counts, when strong brand preferences are being formed throughout those early and middle, throughout the awareness and the consideration stages, when there's a big goal they're trying to figure out, a big challenge of trying to figure out how they're going to overcome, when there's dozens of questions that they're trying to get answered, when they're starting to define what the solution looks like and compare the different kinds of solution categories that are in front of them. It's incredibly important that you have a way to be present in as many of those touch points as possible to improve your market presence, because by default, most companies in and around data centers and telecommunications right now are really only showing up in the final 17% of the journey when a lot of the game is already over. It's like, imagine you're general manager for a professional sports team. It could be a football team, a soccer team, a baseball team. And because you're using an outdated playbook, you don't realize that 3/4 of the game has taken place before you even show up. So what do you think is going to happen when your team isn't even on the field for the first 3/4 of the game? Or alternatively, they've substituted high school students or little leaguers or kids when there's professionals, when there's adults playing at this level. But just at a high level, think about how successful your company would be if 75, 85% of that game is over before you're even allowed into the stadium. Do you even have a chance when the team that showed up 2 hours before the game and was on the field during the national anthem and it was competitive? Like it's like night and day. You're just going to get completely crushed. So if your company wants to improve its market presence, it's about becoming self-aware that the way your prospects and clients research and make their purchase decisions has dramatically changed. It looks nothing like it did 10 years ago. And the sooner you catch up to reality that you need to be everywhere where they are, which in many cases is a virtual answer rather than just more events. Like, in other words, you need to show up on their searches when they're asking questions on Copilot and ChatGPT and Perplexity and Google, and when they're posting questions on LinkedIn and Slacks and Discords and watching YouTube videos and tuning into webinars and live streams and podcasts and looking at review sites. You need to be all of those digital places, as opposed to thinking that the event that you invest in aggressively once a year is going to tide them over till 364 days later when they see you again. So those are some considerations for a telecommunications and data center provider that wants to improve its market presence.